Hello and welcome to my session. I hope you had a great conference so far and have learned a lot around Office 365, Azure, SharePoint, and related technologies. We as an IT professional has learned on how we can empower our users to perform efficiently with the right tools available to them at right time. As we are living in a mobile first, cloud first world, we always face the two issues that we need to empower the users, but based on our security posture, our compliance requirements, we need to ensure that the data that the users are accessing all the time is secure and it's also accessible to the users from any device, from anywhere, so that they can perform efficiently and from anywhere. So this session will help you to expand your services to empower your users to meet this business goal, to have your users to perform efficiently from anywhere, and will help you to focus on your security posture as well, on how you can empower the users and create a balance between the user's productivity and your security posture and ensure that your data is being secured when it's being accessed by the users. With that being said, let's get started with this session focused on secure access to Office 365 with conditional access capabilities of Azure. That comes with Azure AD Premium. Before we start, the very first question that everybody should be asking and should be thinking of, who is Riaz? So before we start, let me introduce myself. Riaz is a consultant, a blogger, a trainer, and a community speaker. I have been in the consulting industry and helping the customers with the large enterprise deployments and strategic adoption of the technology for the last 10 years. I have been a blogger on msexperttalk.com, and I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer to deliver the trainings to the corporate customers. Riaz is being a Microsoft MVP for the last 3 years based on what I have been doing with the community for the last 3 to 4 years now. I love to speak in the community events and I love to share my experience, my knowledge, and my real time field experience that I have with the end users so that they can adopt and they can learn and they can make the better decisions for their business and their IT infrastructures. Oh, wait a minute. Did I tell you I'm a human being as well? Yes, I'm a human as well, and I love to work on the technology. This is a typical slide that I usually have in all of my sessions when I'm delivering the technology sessions to the customers, to my partners, to my end users as well. We always, as a IT professional, think about having a end users empowerment. The users should be able to collaborate, a connectivity should be there, they should have a global reach, and they can communicate with each other at any time from any location, from any device, and they can perform the business operations from anywhere. But did we ever think about the auditing of the users activities, security, compliance, how we are ensuring that data is secure, how we ensure that the data which is being transferred from one device to the other device is secure, how we are going to ensure the compliance of our data, if we have to meet our HIPAA compliance or financial data compliance or other security parameters that we need to have in place, how we are going to ensure that. This is something that we usually cover with, from a Microsoft standpoint. We do have the solutions. Microsoft is doing a tremendous job to introduce the security solutions within their cloud-based services, 365, Azure, and other platforms. And we do have the capabilities to merge and implement those solutions based on our business needs, and we can modify the policies. So with that being said, let's look at the agenda that we have for this session. Today, in this session, we are going to look at what is conditional access, why we need to consider a conditional access, and where we can use and how we can use a conditional access to secure my 365, to secure my other SaaS applications that I'm using in my organization. How can I use conditional access or extend my conditional access to secure my on-premises application like Exchange or other line of business application. And the last thing is how we can have conditional access to help us against our risky login or risk-based users activities where A user is trying to log in from a risky location, or his device is not compliant, where I can have a data breach on the device, or these type of controls or the security concerns that we have, how I'm going to control those particular security issues that I have in my organization. With that being said, let's get started with our session. First thing, conditional access. I have been talking a lot in the beginning of my session that I will be focused on conditional access, how conditional access is going to help you secure your organization. But what is conditional access? And from where we can get the conditional access capabilities to have our infrastructure secure. So conditional access is a capability of Azure Active Directory that enables you to enforce controls on the access to the app in your environment based on specific conditions. Again, those specific conditions could be your IP information, that the request should be coming from a certain IP range, or the device should be compliant, or you have a MFA requirements, or any other business security requirements that you need to have in place. With controls in conditional access, you can either tie additional requirements to the access, or you can block the device from accessing the data based on the device health. The implementation of conditional access is purely based on the policies in Azure Active Directory, and a policy-based approach always simplifies your configuration experience, but it follows the way you think about your access requirements. Conditional access in Azure is comprised of actually two items. Number one is the condition statement on what will be the scenario, or what is going to be happen, and then the control. Okay, based on this statement, if this statement is going to be true, what will the controls that I need to implement or enforce to the end users? In a conditional access policy, control defines what it is that should happen when a conditional statement has been satisfied. And with controls, we can either block access or allow access with additional requirements. When you configure a policy that allow access, you need to select at least one requirement. One requirement could be compliance, multi-factor authentication, the source IP information of the users, or the other information. Now, the next thing is that I'm going to talk about is the conditional access based on application or location. When you configure a conditional access policy, you actually need to select the user or group your policy is going to be applied on. In many cases, you actually want to have a control to be applied to be a specific set of users, or an individual user, or the whole organization. In a condition statement, we can define this set by selecting the specific set of users for a specific line of business application. If necessary, you can also explicitly exclude a set of users from the policy by exempting them. So let's look at this screenshot that I have for you from my conditional access policy, and I'm going to have this same demo. Once we are done with this PowerPoint presentation, then I'm going to show you the conditional access policies that I have in place in my Azure 365 configurations for this particular demo. So as you can see in the current implementation of Azure AD, you can see there are few areas where I have the policies, and number one is the conditions. As you can see, I have 4 different areas where I can define my conditions against my statement, right? So the conditions could be sign-in risk, then it could be device platform. I can specify a specific device platform. It could be iOS. Mac is actually in preview as of now. It could be Windows. It could be your Android devices. And then the location, it's not tied up with a physical location of the user. It's more of a IP address, because on the internet, the users are communicating based on the IP address instead of the physical location, which eventually tied up, we can track down the location, but the communication behind the scene between the services is based on the IPs, so we need to define those particular public IP addresses. And the last one is the client applications. You can actually define the client applications as well, that this policy is going to be applied on which application. And a sign-in risk is actually an object. I just wanted to give a high-level overview from there. Sign-in risk basically is an object in Azure Active Directory to track the likelihood that a sign-in attempt was not performed by the legitimate owner of a user account. If this object is being set, you can set the sign-in risk to high, medium, or low. stored in a form of an attribute called sign-in risk levels. That's a part of your Azure portal as well. This object is generated during a sign-in of a user, and if the sign-in risk have been detected by the Azure AD, then it's going to have a user as a risky user, because it could be possible Riaz is currently based in Pakistan. I'm logging to 365 or Azure Active Directory to access a service with one of my public IP address, which is coming from Pakistan, right? After 5 minutes or 10 minutes, Riaz is trying to access 365, and this time his source IP address is coming from somewhere in Europe. And after 10 minutes, I'm trying to access the same service, but now my source IP address is coming from somewhere in US. So Azure AD is going to use a machine learning language on the back end, and it's going to identify that this activity from user account Riaz, it doesn't seem to be a normal activity. It's an abnormal behavior of the user, and it's going to identify Riaz as a risky user, because either Riaz password is being compromised, or Riaz is doing something malicious, or something going on with a Riaz account, and that will be highlighted in Azure Active Directory as well. The next piece is once you identify your conditions, that these are my conditions that I want the users, or my statements in other words, that I want the users to fulfill, the next step is what will be the control, or what you want to do once the condition statement is fulfilled. Do you want to allow the user to access the service, or do you want to have some additional controls on your services? With that being said, as you can see, the grant control under the access control services, I can either block the access. Block access, it doesn't look good, right? Why should I block access to my user? There are scenarios where you would like to block the access to the services that you have. It could be risky sign-in. It's highly recommended that you block the access to the services if the user sign-in is risky, because Riaz authentication request is risky because he's trying to authenticate from 3 different continents within a 15 or 20 minutes of time span, which is not possible, right? So again, the reason could be either Riaz is doing something malicious, or his account is being compromised, okay, or someone is trying to perform a brute force attack on Riaz account. So the second one is the grant access. Once I have my conditional statement fulfilled in terms of the use, let's say I have the policy that the user should be accessing the services from a Windows platform based on the device operating system, or Mac operating system, or Android, and the user traffic is coming from one of my corporate IP range, then I would definitely like to grant the access. But I do have the option that I can further enforce the actions on the user, that if the user is coming from Windows platform, he should be requiring to have a multi-factor authentication, or his device should be compliant, which means the user has to enroll his own device with my Intune or Azure Active Directory on the back end, and the device should meet my compliance policy requirements, which could be minimum OS, the security requirements, the network access protection, or the other compliance requirements in terms of PIN and the password policies and everything. Or the last one, which is if I have some pre-approved application. This feature set is still in preview, but I'm expecting that this will be available sometime by end of this year to everyone, and we can leverage that feature in more detail. And then these are my controls. Now there is a difference. If you can see, the grant option or the grant access actually has 4 checkboxes for me. I can empower my user by selecting multiple options, that user should fulfill one of these options, right? And I can say, okay, as you can see in my policy, I have my users to require to have their device as a compliant with Azure, or the device should be a domain joined with Azure Active Directory as well. Now the second option that you can see for multiple controls, because I have multiple controls in place, what I can do is, if I have very strict security requirements there where I want to have my user to go through multiple security controls, I would select the first option, that all the selected controls should be fulfilled before the user can access the data or do something. And the second option, if I want to have the control, I want to have my security posture in place, but I want my user to have options as well so he can perform whatever best works for the user. And I can select the second option, which will be if the user is going to meet any one of these requirements that I have selected, he or she will be able to access the services in 365 or other SaaS-based services that I have in place. How your mobility and your MDM and your security works is you actually deploy the MDM solutions along with your non-MDM devices. When I have my MDM solutions, which in Microsoft scenario, I will talk about Intune. Now the Intune is a part of the Azure as well, because the Intune management console is being moved to Azure. That gives us more liberty and control because of the thousands of SaaS applications that are available to us and the other controls which comes from Azure Active Directory as well. But if we have a devices and we can actually have a device locked down and we can have the devices being managed with my MDM solution. Whereas the personal devices, unknown devices, we can have BYOD scenarios or the corporate owned scenarios as well. Now, the next thing is the conditional access for the mobile apps or the mobile devices. I talked about the scenarios where I was just referring the devices, but we were looking at those scenarios, and those scenarios were more focused on end users or the devices that they have. Let's talk about a little bit more specific to the mobile devices on how the mobile devices are going to access when we have the security postures in place. So the very first thing is that I have, as you can see on the screen, how the access control works when a user is going to access emails in Office 365 on his iOS device or the Android device. The process is same. So the very first step that the user is going to see is he or she is going to request the Outlook application to authenticate to Azure Active Directory. During the authentication process, the Azure Active Directory is going to look at the Intune and see if the device is being enrolled based on my policies for the compliance and everything. Behind the scene, this is unknown to the end users because he's just sending a request to authenticate to Azure AD. Once the device is being registered or quarantine on the Intune side, then it actually goes to the unified enrollment, which enrolls the device within Intune, which is now a part of Azure. And once that process is being completed, then the device is being set for the device compliance and the management in Intune. Once this piece is done behind the scene, the user is done with the device enrollment, then there's a authorization or that token which is being issued to the application. That token is then presented to a cloud-based service of Microsoft, the Outlook Cloud Service, which talks to Azure Active Directory as well for the verification and look at what type of policies and controls we have on these devices. Based on the policies and the controls, the device is going to fetch the response from Azure AD policies, and those responses will be presented to Office 365 email services, which is Exchange Online. And Exchange Online will return that particular information back to the users on the Outlook application. Again, all these pieces based on your policies, and the policies are based on your conditions and your statements on what you want to do, how you want to do. And all this can be done with your Azure AD conditional access policy. During this rollout, if there is any issues with the device, with my compliance policies that the device is not going to meet, or the user source information that I'm trying to validate against my conditional access, the user will not be able to access any of the emails on his iOS or Android device. Again, it's just a reference from an iOS and Android device, and every organization, every customer can have a different security compliance requirements for this conditional access. Someone might allow access to all of the emails without looking at any policies. Someone might want to have the devices or the users to be restricted when they are coming to the organization for access on their mobile devices. Now let's take a look at how the users are going to have the access when they're using a web-based browser on these devices, and what will be the end user experience. So same thing. Now my very first step is user launch the browser, right? The moment user launches the browser, he's going to be authenticated to Azure Active Directory, and behind the scene, Azure Active Directory is going to perform the same set of policies. It's going to look at Intune, it's going to look at the unified enrollment, it's going to look at the policies, the device profiles, whatever we have configured in Intune. Again, one more time, Intune is now a part of Azure as of now, and Intune Management Console is being moved to Azure infrastructure. So we have one single administrative console, which is Azure, to manage my mobile devices, my MDM solution policies, my conditional access, my devices, my applications, and that's the goal, to empower your administrator as well, so that they have a ease of management and administration. So once the device profile on the back end is being done by the Azure Active Directory, from a user's profile enrollment, the user's device compliance and everything, the next step is user will actually goes to the 365 email services straight away. In this scenario, as you can see, there is no intermediate application because it's a web-based access, and I do not have Outlook service in between because I'm not using a Outlook application. So I will go to the 365 email service, and based on the requirements and the security fulfillment, I will be either allowed access to access my email services, or I will be denied. Again, the process is going to be the same. The flow of the traffic, flow of the architecture process is going to be the same. The only thing that varies is how you are going to empower the users, right? So the next step is because I'm talking about the email services only, I have my architectural diagram on how the conditional access works when you have a on-premises Exchange server. Again, I'm just referring the Exchange as an on-premises application for the conditional access, but this conditional access capabilities are extended to the other line of business application, which can be deployed on premises like SharePoint or your Skype or other line of business applications. I, being a Exchange expert, I always use Exchange as my examples, as my reference, and how the flow is going to happen within the Exchange. So let's take a look at the architecture and the flow of the traffic when you have on-premises Exchange server deployed and somebody is going to try to access the corporate emails on his mobile device using Exchange ActiveSync protocol, right? The very first request, the user is going to hit my Exchange server as always, and behind the scene, the Exchange server is going to have Intune to look at the policies and see if a device is managed device or it's a non-managed device. If the device is going to be a non-managed, the very first thing, the user is going to get a blocking where the user will be denied access to the services, and the user will get the error message. He or she has to enroll with Intune. That's the standard conditional access, right? Now, if a device is a managed device, or a user is now going to enroll the device with Intune, what will happen? The device is going to be enrolled with the Intune using a unified enrollment. The device will be registered in Azure Active Directory as well, and the Azure Active Directory is going to create a Exchange ActiveSync ID for the device ID binding. It's going to bind those particular two parameters to pass back to my Exchange server to to approve or to say that this device is one of the devices which should be allowed access to the services. Exchange server is going to read that particular information, and based on that particular information, Exchange server is going to allow the access to the managed device on the ActiveSync or the iOS devices. So this access of the email content on a mobile device on premises Exchange is also supported through your conditional access policies in Azure Active Directory. Now, the next piece that I'm going to talk about, which is one of my favorite topics and which is one of my favorite items that I always love to cover, is the Microsoft Lookout. Lookout partnership between Microsoft and Lookout. Lookout is a third-party software which provides, I would say, a a different vendor which provides you the visibility into the applications, your network and device based risk. And through our deep integrations of these solutions from the Lookout with Microsoft, you actually get more insights and you can use that particular informational data that is coming from Lookout to define your risk-based data to enforce conditional access. It works really, really, really well with Microsoft Intune as part of the EMS suite, and it's an additional licensing cost. I'm not the licensing expert, and I won't be able to talk about the licensing cost, and I'm not a salesperson, right? So let's talk about the functional or the technical stuff around Lookout. So let's consider an example where I have a mobile device which is enrolled within Intune. It's fulfilling my compliance policies. It has my requirements that the traffic should be coming from these IP addresses. This should be the minimum OS and this should be the device requirements. What happens if the device is going to have a spyware or any malware? Boom, I have a antivirus or a malware on my machine which is impacting now, right? What should I be doing now? The moment Lookout is going to identify a virus on your machine based on the Lookout policies and the Intune integrations, what it's going to do is it's going to report that particular information back to the console, and where we will have, okay, we have a virus identified, we have a malware on the device, and we have a device on risk now. What should we be doing now? The Lookout and our conditional access policies integrations, we can actually lock down my corporate managed applications where the user has data on my corporate on devices, right? So once that particular device is being locked from the corporate application, the very next step is, again, you perform your next implementations to remove or clean the device, to remove those particular viruses, spyware, or whatever it is which is impacting the device. And the moment you have your device reported as a healthy device and all the issues and all the error messages and spywares and viruses are being removed from the device is going to be reported as a healthy device. And again, based on my policies, the applications that are being pushed to the end users from my corporate are going to be unlocked for the users to use them and send and receive the emails, access my files, and do the day-to-day work that they are supposed to be doing and be productive all the time. Now, the next question is how the Azure is going to identify that the identity is on risk or something going on, right? Lookout is going to provide some insights from a device health perspective, the virus attacks and these type of things. But how Azure Active Directory, because I have been talking all the time about a risky login from a user. I gave an example of Riyadh logging in from US, from Europe, and from Pakistan in a time span of less than 30 minutes. But what's going on behind the scene, which is going to identify that Riyadh is a malicious user, right? So that's a new feature which was being announced and which is available. I would not call it a new feature, to be honest. As of now, it's pretty old. It's Azure Active Directory Identity Protection. Azure Active Directory Identity Protection is actually a feature of Azure AD, and you can have this feature as part of the Azure AD Premium P2 license. And this feature, what it does is it provides you a consolidated view to examine the suspicious users activities, and you can configure the vulnerabilities as well on what should be your remediation recommendation, what will be the risk severity calculations, how you are going to identify. So detect potential vulnerabilities affecting your organizational identities. You can provide custom recommendations to improve your overall security posture by highlighting the vulnerabilities, calculating sign-in risk levels. Again, these calculations of the risk levels are based on a machine learning languages running behind the scene in Microsoft Azure data centers, and again, they are capturing and they are actually helping millions of customers as of now, the million of users as of now that are using the Azure Active Directory. Second thing is the configuration automation responses. I am not dependent on a user, or I'm not relying on my IT administrator, that if there's a suspicious attack or there's some suspicious activities going on with a user account at 3 a.m. in the morning, my IT or my engineering resource will be available to look at the user account, to work with the user, or the end user will be available so that we can work with the user to help fix the issue or what's going on with his account. With Azure AD Identity Protection, I can actually configure automated responses to detect suspicious actions that are related to my organization identities. And once I identify those particular detects or suspicious actions, I can configure my conditional access based on those particular risks as well. I can configure my risk-based conditional access to block the access of the applications, right? This is what I gave you the very first example when I started this presentation, that I have a scenarios where I would be required to block my users to access my corporate services in certain scenarios, right? And the second thing could be that we policies to require the users that they should go through a multi-factor authentication, like Riaz. As a organization, Riaz is not that critical user, right? Riaz travels a lot, so Riaz account is being identified as a risky account by Azure AD. What should be the second parameter that we can do on top of Riaz credentials? Let's enforce multi-factor authentication, right? Riaz has to go through to register his device or do a multi-factor authentication every time he's going to access my corporate services, right? This ensures me, okay, Riaz username and password can be compromised, but his MFA, or the second factor authentication, is not going to be compromised, because again, the 365 or the Azure MFA behind the scene, it actually gives you the capabilities or have controls on your users. So we are increasing, or we are empowering the user, and we are also having our security posture in place so to ensure our securities. And the last one is, once you investigate the suspicious incidents and you take appropriate actions to resolve them, that comes with the Azure Identity Protection, right? You can send notifications for risk events, investigation risk events, and the relevant contextual information, providing basic workflows to track investigations on what's being done, how it's being done, how it's being fixed, right? I can have some policies in place. Riaz doesn't travel a lot, right? Riaz authentication request is coming from different locations and he's being identified as a risky user. It could be possible someone is trying to hack Riaz's account, right? Because Riaz has the company CEO email, right? So we can have our automated request, and we can have Riaz to change his password on the next login to ensure, okay, someone is trying brute force attack, good luck, because we have our user to reset a password now, right? So it's going to have, again, they have to actually go through to the process of brute force and everything again as a hacker, right? So more to come. This is more of my future roadmap that I used to present, and this is the best picture that I just can give you on how this identity protection stuff going on. And last but most importantly, this is how a complete security posture and a security implementation within an organization can be done. This diagram actually shows you how you can actually use the complete EMS suite. Although I was just focused on the conditional access, which can be licensed or which can be buy as part of your Azure AD Premium standalone license, or you can actually have that particular license as part of the EMS suite. I always recommend to go with an EMS suite to have more secure controls with more liberty to have your focused and your managed devices as well. This is a complete posture from an EMS security perspective, that you have your users, you have your Azure information protection, your Azure Active Directory conditional access, data encryptions, classifications, advanced threat analytics, and then most importantly, your mobile device management and the cloud app security as well. Before we wrap up this session, let me show you these configurations that I was referring all the time during my presentation in a live session on Microsoft Azure portal. As you can see in my Azure portal, I actually have some conditional access policies configured. Let's take a look at the conditional access policy for the users with a risky logins, and I already had the configurations in place, but I'm just going to show you the options that I have in place. Okay, so as you can see, assignments, I have this policy assigned to everybody in my organization. And then cloud applications, I have selected one application, which is Microsoft Teams. And then the conditions, what are my conditions that I have? I have selected that the sign-in risk is going to be configured. What it would be, if the sign-in is going to be high, then what it should be doing, I, I always allow access because this is my test policies and I'm doing the testing. I allow the access, but I need all my security controls in place, right? I want my users to have a multi-factor authentication. I want my users to have their device compliant with my compliance policies. I want my users to have their device registered with Azure Active Directory. And most importantly, I want my users to have approved client applications. Like it could be my managed applications as well. And the most important, if you look at my security control, I don't want my users to have all these four controls in place. I want my user to fulfill one of these requirements. The user can either have him MFA, the user can either have his device as a compliant, or the users can have my device enrolled with Intune and all their stuff. And once it's done, the user will be allowed access to my applications. And as you can see, my policy is enabled as of now. So it's already in place and it's working fine. I don't have any issues, and I'm empowering my users to access those applications, and I'm actually having my controls in place. With that being said, it's time to say goodbye, and I hope you had enjoyed the session and you learned something new that you can implement in your organization to empower your users with your security posture in place to ensure the data integrity and the data security as well. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more great sessions for the rest of the day. Wish you a good luck. Thank you. Bye bye.